Good evening. I'm Doug Wills, and I'm chair of London Press Club. Welcome to our annual debate, and I would normally say welcome to Stationers Hall. We are grateful to the stationers and newspaper making company for, and we're also grateful for the support of the Society of Editors. According to the Reuters Institute's digital news report just released, trust in the media has eroded worldwide. Fewer than 4 in 10 people across 40 countries say they typically trust most news. And it's getting worse. Yes, particularly in the UK, trust in the media reduced by 12% in the last year. Trust in news services overall is 28%. In Brazil, for comparison, it's 51%. Now, trust in the whole issue has been put into the greater limelight by Donald Trump and by Facebook in the last couple of days. Tonight, we have a panel of editors who we hope have some of the explanations and hopefully, to coin a current phrase, a roadmap to greater trust. I would like to introduce the chair of tonight's debate, Anne McElvoy, the Economist senior editor, a broadcaster, and a columnist with the Evening Standard. The column's in tonight, actually, if you want to get a copy or see it online. Just a housekeeping. At the bottom of your screen is a Q&A button you will see and be familiar with. I'm sure you will have questions, so that's the road into getting Anne's attention and questions to the panelists. So Anne, over to you.
Thanks so much, Doug, and I'm very pleased to do this. In fact, we've done it a few times at the Stationers Hall. I'm very sad not to be in that space with us all tonight, but I'm very grateful to have such an illustrious panel with us virtually, and we'll all go off for our virtual drinks together afterwards. As Doug mentioned, there is clearly a persistent issue around trust and the media, and we're going to hear from my panel in just a moment, but they span broadcast media, they span newspapers and digital media, and the confluence between the two, and still the sharp end of being a practicing reporter and editor. And across all of those areas and in any of the work we do, I think we're very aware of this topic, so I would like to interrogate it with them in just a moment. I think I'll just add perhaps a slightly awkward squad question myself, which is, why do we expect trust to be so high at a time when we know people have more access to information, who are more critical, perhaps, and the 7 veils of journalism have fallen away a lot since I started out sometime back in the 18th century. So I wonder sometimes whether we can also slightly invert that question about trust. But my panelists will know exactly what they want to say about it. I'm going to give them no more than 5 minutes each to set out their stalls, and then we'll have a little bit of chat and interrogation between them. I'll also be looking avidly towards the Q&A. I know we've got so many of you in the room with a ton of expertise, so I'm hoping that you're going to save me some of the work. But let me introduce the panel and get us underway. Jamie Angus is BBC Director of World Service Group. He's a former editor of the Today programme on Radio 4, and he's got a new job because that's the BBC for you these days. He's very shortly going to be Controller of Output and Commissioning, which sounds like, well, it basically sounds like God, doesn't it, Jamie? And next to Jamie, depending on how you're looking at your screen, is Alison Phillips, who is, of course, editor of The Mirror and deputy editor-in-chief at the group there. Polly Curtis will be next up. She's managing director of PA Media and former editor-in-chief of HuffPost UK. Kim Sengupta is still practicing at the good old coalface of reporting high-level analysis from around the world. I've known Kim for many years and respected his work. He's now defence and diplomatic editor for The Independent. So I think, Kim, you will be able to give us, as well as other things, a bit of an international prism on where you see this going. But Jamie, I'm going to hand over the floor to you to get us underway.
Thanks very much, Anne. Thanks, Doug, and very great pleasure to be with you all. I might start on Kim's beat, actually, on the global side of my outgoing job, which is, it seems to me, in some ways, that worrying about the decline of trust is a luxury for those of us who live in pretty mature and robust media markets. So I think my initial thoughts are to ask you all to give some thought to the people of Myanmar, the people of China, the people of Kashmir, who in the last year alone have had their entire digital services switched off by an overarching state in a deliberate attempt to prevent them getting any access to any news whatsoever, however dysfunctional. And we're very proud at the World Service of our, the Burmese service in particular for Myanmar, which is continuing to reach about 80% of the addressable digital audience in Myanmar at an extraordinarily difficult time. So I'll just start with that sort of important caveat. That I think looking elsewhere around the world, and you've already alluded to it, Doug, that you only need to look at the situation in the United States now to see exactly what's at stake for us all. And I'm sure some of you, like me, have been lucky enough to be able to travel for work there over the last 18 months or so. I have to say most of my US media consumption now is based on a rather shady streaming device that I've managed to sideload onto my Amazon Fire Stick, which allows me to watch MSNBC, Fox and CNN obsessively from home at all hours of the day and night. But even based on that and a bit of experience in the country, it's much worse than you even think it is. The public square in American life has fallen apart to a quite unprecedented degree. And I think the effects of that are very plain to see just in the news, but it's something that should give us very real concern in the UK, lest some of the effects of it be felt here. I was very touched to read, some of you may have seen this great piece in Foreign Policy magazine by Elizabeth Braw called "Why the US Needs a BBC." And I say that not particularly to plug the BBC actually, but because I think what her piece sets out is that kind of accepted public square of legitimate debate around vital issues, particularly around public health at the moment, is entirely missing. It's quite a good time for us in the US at the moment, the BBC incidentally. The Reuters report, which has been much mentioned already, had a fascinating chart which showed that the BBC is the most trusted international and national news provider in the United States. We're beaten only by local television in the US. And I think that probably speaks to the absence of kind of accepted, again, this accepted public square where the most important issues can genuinely be sensibly debated by all sides who are interested in listening to each other. So once that's a bit of a comfort for us, but a bit of a threat of what may be coming. My final thought really is just about whether the pandemic has actually fundamentally changed everything about this discussion. In some ways, broadcasters in particular, but broadcasters and digital news providers are looking a bit cheerier than we did 18 months ago, not 12 months ago. And that is because the COVID pandemic has sent audiences running back to quality news providers to a quite unprecedented degree. And I'm very much looking forward to hearing from Alison, Kim and Polly on this front. It's certainly true in the BBC, where our linear audiences for good old steam-powered TV and radio bulletins, remember them, have jumped up very, very significantly. And our web traffic, both in the UK and globally, has hit almost unheard of heights, particularly around moments of crisis in the global pandemic. And I just wonder, this is probably a Panglossian view, but you just wonder whether the extent of what we've all been through will slightly reset people's expectations about the value of trusted news services, the need to pay for them, particularly in the commercial sphere, and that very complex interplay between the platforms, our own platforms, but the digital platforms that allow many of you to reach your audiences. And this is obviously the really topical question with Australia right now, isn't it? That one of the things that's fundamentally changed about our industry, I feel, over the last couple of years is, people often say about the BBC, well, the BBC's competitors are Sky News or ITV, or, internationally we're competing with CNN. I don't think any of that's true anymore. The BBC's competitors are a toxic tidal wave of dangerous nonsense, a lot of it directly affecting global health and the health and economic well-being of every single person on the planet. And much of this is either entirely malicious or actively state-sponsored. And that's our competition. And it's a really important moment, I think, for everyone in the industry to come together and work out what we can do to defend the existence of the public square against that. And if we win that battle over the next 18 months, both globally and here in the UK, then we will have done a good job, it seems to me.
Thank you very much, Jamie. That was, I think, a largely upbeat assessment to get us going. You won't get off quite so lightly, because I think what I've heard from the panel, I'm going to come back to you and perhaps squeeze a little bit on what you meant there at the end, and what, how far being aware of dangerous sort of countercurrents in the media and the distrust sowing deliberately in certain parts of the media, how far do we go in combating that without infringing on freedom of expression, and what do we think about kind of newcomers into the market, sometimes through that prism and sometimes just through a kind of critique of where that leaves our agreed public space in media. So mark your card there, you get thinking about that. But I'm going to turn now to Alison Phillips. So Alison, you're leading a paper which has a fact-based view of what is news, but it also has a point of view. It's a crusading paper, it's a campaigning paper, and it socks it to some of its enemies on a regular basis.
Right.
You're looking very composed this evening, but we do know that in that very study you have been known to fist pump the air when one of your illustrious reporters, Pippa Cray, wrote the story about Dominic Cummings going to Bishop Auckland. So we do know, Barnard Castle. Oh,
Indeed.
So we know that you have a kind of point of view, and I'm interested in how that then comes into this debate about trust and what is kind of fair and what isn't.
Yes, well, I think the interesting thing, I think, around the point of view is that so what has been lost in the way that people are accessing a lot of news now through social media is the context with which stories come. And so I think somebody who's been reading the Mirror for all their lives know very much what the Mirror is, what it stands for, and what our biases are. But what we now have in social media and the way people are accessing news is there is just so much news out there from so many different sources that all comes without the context, that all comes about the backstory of why these stories are being said. And so I think that makes it a lot harder for people to assess what that viewpoint is from the people. So I mean, I think, echoing Jamie's points, I think there is reasons for hope, because I kind of feel that we've probably reached about as bad as it can go, really, in many ways, in terms of trust, because I think not necessarily trust in the media, but trust in news. And I think we've got to sort of prize that slightly apart between news that's been created by somebody in their mother's back bedroom in Kansas, which is masquerading as news, and actually news from established news sources and the established media here. Now, we know, as Jamie said, that during the virus, we have seen more people turning to television, certainly. We've seen more people coming to established news brands. Throughout the pandemic, people have still gone out every day and bought their Mirror. We've lost sales, really didn't take that too much of a hit, even when people were really not being told to leave their homes. And certainly digitally, we put on an extra 1 billion page views last year. So that's the demand for proper trusted news. So that is really there. And I think we have to prize those two things apart. And yes, there is skepticism, and yes, there is concern about some of the rubbish that is circulating on social media, but those established news brands have shown their worth, and they have really done their job in keeping people alive during this. So I think that's important, and I think as a result of that, news brands more than ever have to really work hard at ensuring that we are clear about and consistent about what we stand for, and so that we do stand out from all that noise and nonsense that's circulating in the same places that unfortunately we also have to now sell our wares. So that kind of pressure is upon us for those brands to be even clearer and more considered. I think also we need to look to ourselves as well to be, there's lots of opportunities now. So I think what's interesting is I think the free run that Facebook and Google have had for quite a long time is drawing to a close. I know they still hold enormous power and enormous sway, but at least now the questions are being asked, which 5 years ago they weren't being asked. The questions about what they should be paying in terms for the content that they're sharing, and also for what rules that they should be living by. So all the rules that we in established press have lived by, what rules are going to apply to them? So I think finally they are starting to have to step up to the mark. And then I think there is also the point that we should be proud that people do want news, and we have to take what the learnings from the virus are into the post-virus world so that we can retain that trust with people. And I think that we need to look at how we build those relationships that we've always had traditionally in print with our readers, that closeness. That means that people were prepared to go out and risk their lives to go and buy a newspaper when they wanted to ensure that those relationships and that strength of the brand is working digitally in exactly the same way. That perhaps when in the early days of digital, there was so much emphasis on traffic in many organizations beyond the actual relationship with the customer or the reader, that if we can get that right digitally, I think we're in quite a potentially more hopeful position.
Thank you very much, Alison, and I think we should definitely be following up. I'm sure the questions are beginning to come in thick and fast there on whether these deals that publishers are doing now with Google and Facebook, and have we got the tiger by the tail or the other way around? Because there's also been a bit of a history of thinking, we just about got this sorted, we've done this fantastic deal, only to find out that really, the major tech platforms have been the beneficiaries. How should so-called traditional media, or indeed new and innovative quality media, go about that relationship? I'd love to dig into that a bit more. Now, Polly Curtis actually well placed to take us on from here. A really interesting thing about Polly's recent jobs is you've really seen two different operating environments, haven't you? HuffPost UK, definite point of view, quite new, and particularly when it came on the scene, felt very new, very fresh, even a bit brash. And now you sit there at PA, which is, if anything, and I also did my regulation stint when I was a trainee reporter with the Times, and PA, my goodness, if you said it's raining outside, you better double sources and sort of check the density. So you've worked in two very different environments in recent times, and I wonder whether that experience has raised some questions for you about the trust issues that face both sorts of operation.
Well, I mean, I would say that I'm reflecting the comments others have made here. Trust is our #1 currency. I think we would all on this panel say that trust is the single most important thing we have in our relationship with our audiences. And you're right, at PA Media, we're in a very different part of the news ecosystem. So formerly Press Association, we provide a comprehensive news service to all the news organisations in the country. So we don't publish directly to audiences, we publish to newsrooms who adopt our journalism and buy into it because they trust it. And that can't be stressed as being important enough. It really is absolutely critical to who we are and what we do. And 10 years ago, the model of an agency was really challenged by social media because it was really, really fast, and because politicians could announce things to social media and cut the journalists out. But I think now we're coming back full circle because we need sources of information that we entirely trust, and that news ecosystem needs that support that we provide day to day in providing additional sources and reporters on the ground. And I think I would really echo something that Jamie said, the extraordinary effort that reporters across the industry made over the last year to tell the most important story of any of our lives. The information was having such real-time impacts on everyone's lives. The sensitivity of audiences to that story was really extraordinary, and I think it was done across the industry with the utmost of responsibility and thought, and as a real service to our audiences. The problem is that on social media, it's very hard now in a social media stream to distinguish between that journalism that goes through all those processes and all the other content. Not least Netflix, which, at points in the pandemic was kind of my chosen source of media when it was all getting too much, definitely. So I don't think there's ever been a more important time for what we do. We just need to find ways to stand out and connect with our audiences more, because that content all looks the same in those timelines. And it's on all of us to make sure that every bit of journalism we produce, whoever we work for, is as accurate as we can possibly make it. But I think it's also on the platforms to really showcase what is verified journalism and to mark out journalism as a different kind of information to all the other information that's out there, that's not verified, that has different agendas, and that that can distract and add to what, you know, Alison talked about as the noise. And one final thing I'll just say about trust is that I think it's worth saying that this isn't something that's just happening to journalism, and this is something that's happening across institutions. So Reuters looks at journalism, Edelman Trust Survey looks at governments, at businesses, at establishments, and, you know, everyone's got a trust deficit going on at the moment. So it is part of a bigger trend. It's an uphill battle. But I don't know an industry that is more focused on it than we are right now.
That's really a very good point, and I think I sort of alluded to a bit in my opening remarks. I'm sometimes a little skeptical about how much is it reasonable to expect that you'll get back in terms of trust when people are perhaps informed in different ways. They're more likely to sort of take oppositional views. And of course, if you go around the world, you will find a lot of trust in bad systems as well, won't you? Because people are not given the information, in a sense, to make up their mind whether they can trust it or not.
But just, sorry, can I just come back on
please
that?
do.
Because your question was around HuffPost, a brand that I was incredibly proud to lead to the UK.
Yeah.
And what was interesting about HuffPost relationship with the audience, when you look at the Reuters survey, it was like really middling on trust. It was a new brand. It was less well established, you know. But when you looked at the brand surveys around it, people really, really liked it. And I think actually that's quite an important thing as well. We talk about trust as the only barometer, but actually affinity, and does that brand represent who I am and what's happening in my life, is a really important element of this as well.
That's a really good point. Trust is not the only measure that matters here. So, Kim Sengupta, you've kind of reported from lots of societies, different trust levels, different problems about what the media can and can't do. Have we got our worries about in the right place? And how does this strike you?
Good evening. Thanks very much, Anne. I think as people have said before, I think as Jamie mentioned, you know, it's obviously not purely a Western issue. Distrust in the establishment and distrust in the media, which is seen as, in a way, part of the establishment is, you know, is multinational. One of my last trips abroad before the restrictions came in was to Iran to cover the parliamentary elections. And I've been there a few times recently, and what I found striking this time was the sheer scale of the rise in the social media and the utter disbelief in anything being said by officials and also by the more established media. I'll give you an example. I mean, at Tehran University, I came across students who were convinced that Qasem Soleimani of the Revolutionary Guards was not killed by the Americans, that he was killed, in fact, by the Iranian government. Of course, what do you think about the Iranian government? There is no evidence of that whatsoever. But that's what they believed, and you know that's what they disseminated through social media. Coronavirus arrived in Iran while I was there, and of course that led to a plethora of other conspiracy theories of where it came from, who was spreading it, and whether indeed it existed at all. So you have that in a country where a lot of public life and the media is, as you know, as we all know, fairly well controlled, and yet you have got this huge spread of disinformation going on, and questioning of events. But then at the same time, of course, you do, as we know, have colleagues who are in desperate situations, very difficult circumstances, trying to unearth news in the more traditional way that we know. I mean, if you look right next door in Afghanistan, I think about 10 journalists killed in the last few months, targeted by the Taliban, by the warlords, sometimes killed by security forces. And they are carrying out the traditional methods that we have used. We have all used in trying to get our stories and getting them out. So you have got this dichotomy in these places of a rampant alternative media, if you like, sometimes spreading misinformation at the same time in a very brave pursuit of traditional news values by journalists. What has happened in the last year, I find personally, speaking to colleagues in a lot of the countries in the developing world, is that they are facing a lot more restrictions than they've even faced before. And part of this is disguised in the form of the governments and regimes of these countries trying to prevent what they term as lies being spread about the pandemic, which is then used to suppress journalism, which is looking into other official abuse. And some of it, I was speaking to a colleague in India who has been warned about her conduct, she was looking into the awarding of government contracts over pandemic, which of course we know is an issue very much over here. And so, you know, even a country like India, where there's a vibrant media setup, you have got journalists who are targeted and have been targeted more now because the government can bring in restrictions in the form of fighting misinformation. And on that note, you know, quite if I may, I'd like to bring it back slightly to this country. You mentioned.
Yes, if you could, Kim, just like perhaps a closing thought, and then we could just throw it open to the panel and go to questions.
You mentioned how far does one go in combating misinformation in this country. Now we know that you've got the Army, say the 7th Brigade, there to combat misinformation, and you know how much leeway do they have? The GCHQ are bringing out a report tomorrow about what they're doing with misinformation. So these are all the issues about freedom of expression, which ties in with what we're seeing now.
Thank you very much. I will just very quickly pick up a few things. I think I said to Jamie I would go back on this question because you raised it, Jamie. It's a very tantalising one, but I think it also has a certain sort of moral mazy quality to it, which is how I think Kim also referenced it. If you think there is disinformation going out there, which looks or feels or masquerades as news, how far can you go and should you go to stop that? I mean, for instance, how much would you get involved in saying that newspapers or broadcast outlets or streaming, and these things are now a little bit more kind of fuzzy than they were, should really have pressure put on them to stop certain people saying things about the pandemic, for instance, about public health? How far would you go?
Well, I think, and like most journalists, my natural instincts are towards freedom of expression above all things. But I think all of us as private citizens are questioning a little bit how the sort of confluence of news publishing and technology can sometimes amplify quite fringe views on an existential public health crisis into an inappropriate manner. And this is a question that broadcasters and news publishers ask themselves every day. It's something that BBC memorably has been on a bit of a journey around climate change and the MMR vaccine and other issues we can all recall. It's like it's about false balance and proportionality in coverage to reflect how widespread points of view are. And I think one of the things that's bothering me a bit is the sort of reputable news providers are perfectly entitled to air sometimes quite fringe views about, say, masks or the safety of vaccines and so on. but the kind of unregulated digital space where Ofcom regulated broadcasters can sort of republish content onto YouTube, for example, or whatever. Those digital spaces are unregulated by Ofcom or indeed anyone else.
So what would be an example of that? What kind of provider are you talking about here?
Well, so I don't feel that comfortable about the mask cutting up incident on talk radio. Just as a citizen, I don't feel that comfortable. I'm not saying they shouldn't be allowed to do that. And I think talk radio's response would be, well, this was part of a range of coverage that across the piece, people will have heard a variety of different views. But I guess my point is that once that clip goes viral, it passes out of talk radio's direct purview and indeed Ofcom's purview, and the sort of virulence of that image is clearly much greater than there's no sort of corresponding clip of.
Apart from being uncomfortable, I'm not sure whether you mean that sort of just basically you don't think talk radio should have done it, or do you think that Ofcom should extend its remit to cover this kind of material?
Well, I think that happily is not a question, gladly, for the BBC, but I suppose I do think that all of us hopefully the people in the audience and the panel would agree that there is an unregulated digital space attached to linear broadcasting that is currently a bit of a sort of vacant territory in terms of regulation, and normally that doesn't need to bother people too much, but I think in a pandemic it does bother people, and it should bother people, and I look forward to what policy response people want to argue for.
Please, anyone who'd like to jump in. Alison, I wondered how much thought you give to that, because you must have, so you've got a very broad readership. You have a readership also in chat rooms on Facebook and elsewhere. How much do you think, well, they have views, their views that they want to have heard. They see you as a sort of trusted paper that, doesn't treat them as stupid and wants to hear from them. I mean, do you find that occasionally a difficult balance?
Well, I think in all these things, you have to keep your own sort of moral ballast, really, and that if something's not correct, it doesn't really matter how much some people might like to hear it. That's what's got us into this predicament in the first place, that the algorithms are so rigged that that sensationalist, sort of slightly bonkers news gets more clicks. That's why so many people are trading in it. But we have to retain, as established news brands, we have to retain that moral ballast, that we will stick to the accuracy and we will tell the news as it is. I mean, you're sort of moving into this area that kind of worries me most about everything that we're discussing, really, in that we're already a very divided society, and unfortunately I fear that this infodemic or whatever we're going to call it is only really going to exacerbate that, in that I think we could end up with a situation where those people with good incomes and good education will get good quality news, and those people with lower paid or insecure work and less education will get less good work. I mean, I'm not quite sure how many other people in this panel or in this audience have actually met somebody who said to them that they believe that having the virus means they're going to get tracked by Bill Gates. But I've met somebody like that because for various reasons. And there are vast numbers of people out there, and they're exchanging news largely through WhatsApp groups, which I think is one bit of this which isn't possibly getting discussed enough. There's a lot of attention on actual Facebook or social media platforms, but actually it's the WhatsApp groups, I think, which are possibly far more dangerous, because that is news that is being shared by people that they know, they trust them. And so what we are seeing is this idea that people will believe stuff from people they know, people like me. And that's the role of the established news brands, is they have to become those people like me, in that we appear to share the same life experiences, and therefore they are far more likely to trust us. But I think, going back to that earlier point, why this matters so much is that if it's not really tackled properly, and that we're not ensuring that good quality news is getting to people across the spectrum of society, and particularly, this is why I think at the Mirror we do a pretty good job, but we're coming from that old school tabloid tradition of speaking to the masses. And this is where we have to ensure that good quality news is available, because actually there's a lot of good quality news if you've got the money or the kind of the desire to be reading the FT every day.
I'm just conscious of that. I've got loads of great questions coming in, so I'm going to ask Polly, Kim briefly for anything that they'd just like to pick up from that debate. One thing we haven't trusted is the big platforms. If anyone wants to take a view on that, that would be great. And then I'm going to start funding some of these questions. Polly, sorry.
So I was just going to pick up on that inequality and information issue. I think it's so vital. A couple of years ago, I did some work with Reuters Institute looking at this phenomenon of unused people. So if you think about unbanked being kind of disenfranchised from the economy, unused is disenfranchised from democracy, and it is very unequal in terms of who becomes unused. And actually the online world can be less used than the offline world because there are so many other sources of less good information. I think when it comes to the regulation question, it's just so hard to say what is news, what is verified news, how do you regulate that environment? Because I don't want the platforms to be telling us what news is. I think that would be really, really dangerous.
Kim, anything you'd just like to pick up on what you've heard or disagree with? Because that doesn't happen with journalists.
Yeah, very briefly, anecdotally, the point that Alison made about, do we know anyone who thinks that they'll be microchipped? Well, I have met quite a few people, surprising numbers, who are not all uneducated, unread, who have huge issues with this. And just one quick point is how quickly, one can get sucked into the conspiracy theory. One person in particular who has shown no particular interest in politics or any deep social issues, despite being European. She had not much interest in Brexit either. Now, she started talking about vaccines last summer. And then after November, I remember her telling me that she's convinced, of course, that Trump had won the election. Now, what had happened with her is that she had started looking into the website, conspiracy theories, and from vaccine, she's gone on to Trump winning, to 5G masts. So it is, it is insidious the way that people can be sucked into the conspiracy serial, if you like.
Right, let's dive into some questions here. I'm going to start with one from Lee Floyd, who says it's aimed at Jimmy, but I'm sure we'll find ways to broaden it out or bring in some others. You talk about restrictions and censorship of the media in foreign countries, but at home the freedom of the press has been severely affected by government departments having direct control on which media organisations have access to the government and topically to the NHS. An example of this is PA, ta-da, one for you, Polly, who had been almost exclusively been granted access to the NHS COVID testing and vaccination sites as well as ministers. I think Lee's point, I'll go to Jamie and then Polly, is that this sort of sense of negotiated access to get to the front of the bulletins or get special access for reporting is in some way a distortion. Jamie?
So that's a very interesting question. There was a period right at the start of this year where not even the BBC nor PA could get access to hospitals. So I think during the second wave, there was a period of some long negotiation actually about getting access to hospitals. And that, I think that encouraged me in the end to feel this was genuinely an issue about not adding to the burden of the hospitals themselves are in a particularly critical period of stress. And the access that was then granted was fairly extensive, certainly to the BBC, and Polly can speak to PA. I think it's about striking the right balance, isn't it, between, allowing the institutions to get on with their work, but also to have appropriate levels of scrutiny with trusted journalism institutions. Which ones those are, I think happily is a matter for Public Health England, not for me. But I hope people have enjoyed the fantastic coverage that you've seen from Clive Myrie and others going in. BBC London did a fantastic one from St George's and Tooting at the start of the year. I hope people felt that that was appropriate and accountable. Maybe Polly could pick up.
Yes, Polly.
I mean, the only thing I would add is that I think a lot of that has operated on pooled basis so that we can limit the number of people going into dangerous environments, protecting our reporters and protecting the NHS staff. So the footage is available very quickly across free media. So, you know, the access to the information coming out of there. And, you know, PA is fast, fair, accurate. We are neutral. We have no agenda. We're there to witness, bear witness, and to report on behalf of the industry. So, you know, I'd say that to that point.
Just I just want to say very quickly,
please,
we had great access to hospitals as well, which was brilliant. But I think it's probably worth noting as well that that access all became available round about the time there was a lot of sort of fake news stories circulating that the hospitals were empty. So they needed us to show that actually they were really, really struggling. And again, that's our role, and we fulfilled that role.
A related question, so I'm going to put this one to Kim and then throw it back round again from David Walker. What does the panel think about the role of governments here and in the US in reducing trust, making it harder for anyone to fight against attempts by other regimes, as Kim referenced just a moment ago, to restrict the media? We had Trump's war against the so-called mainstream media. I think we'll sort of take that as read. But here, David says, we had number 10 under Dominic Cummings allowing only selected media to lobby briefings and keeping out people of whom he disapproved. When governments in supposedly democratic countries make clear their distrust, how can we expect others to trust the media? Is that a fair upsum, Kim?
Eminently fair, I think, especially if you look at the way obvious example is Mr. Trump in America. He had never publicly endorsed QAnon, for example, but he had supported a lot of the madcap ideas, divisive, toxic views, and then he had waged war against the media like no other president before. And we have seen, paler versions of that over here in Western Europe as well. And certainly if you look at countries like Poland, what's happening with the media there. So, yes, I think, the behavior of people like Trump does give an excuse for other authoritarian leaders elsewhere. That is a matter of fact.
I wonder, though, whether we're, if it's not so difficult really to hit out whether he's in office or out of office at President Trump. I'm going to go back, start going round again, because there's a few related questions here to Jamie Angus. Are we perhaps a little more shy or reserved about sort of calling out what looks like borderline disinformation, say, from the French president about the AstraZeneca virus? I sometimes find when I look at BBC's European coverage, it's like if it's said from a major European institution or in a major European capital, it's reporters straight. And sometimes when we come around to talking about Britain, we're much more critical, or very critical, obviously, when it comes to some major purveyor of untruths like Donald Trump. But are we really as watchful as we should be when mainstream politicians start saying things they might find in their interest, but are perhaps questionably true?
Yeah, I think that's probably a little harsh on the wonderful Katja Adler, who I noticed was all over contrary to what you may have seen asserted on social media. I think Katja in particular and the BBC in general were all over the Europe vaccination story from the moment it became an issue. I mean, I think it's a talking point, isn't it? The difference between what President Macron said about the vaccine and what President Trump are clearly, to any fair observer, in a totally different order of magnitude in terms of sort of persistence of sort of using disinformation and on President Trump's part. But I think it's an absolutely fair point that people shouldn't be people should expect public media and to cover that story, and I think we have.
Right. No, my point wasn't really particularly about one sort of Europe editor at all. It's really in terms of the balance of the amount of attention, perhaps, that we give to some things. But people have their own views on that. They can let us know. Why don't we take this? Yes. I mean, here's an interesting question from Rumiana Vakarelska. Trust in the media comes from balanced reporting across geography and writing on a variety of subjects and cross-checking facts and resources. BBC TV is now doing more programs on developing countries, including long-form promotional interviews, or at least so it is said here, from Dubai, and promoting some countries on air. So I suppose this comes down to this. I understand the question is sort of what is the right amount of cross-hatching information, cross-sourcing, without appearing to sort of be in some ways look like you're being a bit, paraphrasing a bit, sort of top-down, post-colonial. Yeah, we're going to tell you how the world is. And how much do you then have a duty to report other points of view, perhaps other fact bases? I think this one could go to Kim first.
Well, it's what we do in I suppose, in broadly say, the mainstream media is imperfect, and as one knows. Well, I think there is plenty of scope for polemic, but at the same time, I think most journalists would try to give a balanced view. I'm not saying that a journalist can be totally neutral. It's certainly not in a situation, for example, if you are covering a conflict and you come across a massacre, very, very difficult to be entirely detached and neutral then, and maybe your emotion you will color that. But what I do think that the BBC is the case in point that and most British newspapers, that attempts are made to address both sides and give a balanced point of view. We don't always succeed. We often don't succeed, but I think the aim is there.
Here is a question. I think that probably deals with that. It's really that idea of kind of multifaceted stories, and where it's not so clear that there's maybe one line and then an opposing line. And I think various parts of the world, Kim, that you've covered, and of course others will have reported and edited, certainly come into that category. If we look at something like the end game in Syria.
Could I just do a very quick one on that?
And
a really good example of this is reporting Iran. So we have a BBC Persian service based in London whose staff are subject to extensive campaign of state-backed harassment of them and their families back in Iran by the Iranian authorities. And yet at the same time, the BBC rightly insists that we report Iran impartially. And therefore, these same journalists are required to, and willingly do, present, the Iranian government's point of view on international, issues to do with the JCPOA or whatever else it is. And this, in turn, gets them attacked by Iranian royalist groups based in the United States who refer to them as Ayatollah TV. And I'll just give this as an example because it just shows that reporting complex international stories with genuine impartiality doesn't make you any friends at all, and it's just a really good example of what the questioner asked, and also a further example of another worrying development, which is sort of personalized attacks, social media harassment of named journalists in particular, simply for doing their job.
Very relevant question at the moment. I'm sure all news organisations are thinking about their next steps. It's from Alicia Chi-Santorelli, and I've also got it from a couple of other questions, so forgive me if I wrap them into one. Many UK newsrooms aren't as diverse as American newsrooms in reflecting the societies we serve. How do we maintain trust when a newsroom isn't representative of so many lives, experiences and perspectives of modern Britain, or have a polarising agenda? She claims tabloids versus Meghan Markle. Alison, a tabloid editor. This one's probably especially the last part of this must have given you some food for thought recently.
Yes. Well, I mean, on the first part, certainly, if we are going to do our jobs properly as journalists, we have to represent the people that we are writing for. And speaking on behalf of, because that obviously is in a healthy democracy, part of the role of the news media, particularly traditionally in print, has been to speak for our readers. So we're doing lots of work. I know most news organisations in the country now are doing lots of work to ensure that we are more representative of the readers and of the that we serve and of the country that we serve. So that is absolutely imperative, and we're going to have to get there. On issues like Meghan Markle, I mean, we've been. So I mean that's an interesting place where I think the word tabloid is sometimes bandied about sort of to mean all things bad in some people's minds. I mean, we've been sort of reasonably supportive on Meghan Markle throughout sort of everything that's happened, because we're kind of very aware that there are many people in this country who like Meghan Markle, and I think there's one of the big things between people who like and dislike Meghan Markle is an age issue, and I think we have to. One of the things we have to ensure that we are being sufficiently diverse in our newsrooms is that we have younger people who are representing how younger people feel, and we have older people, and we have people of different ethnicities, and we have people with disabilities. So there's all sorts of areas. If we're going to do our jobs properly and really speak to these people effectively so that they trust us rather than thinking that we're just pretending that we understand what they're talking about, then we have to do that.
And what did you think about the recent ruling in the Meghan Markle case? Because one might, whatever, we have a positive view, Meghan Markle, not so positive, but we might still think it would have been better had the judge allowed that case to have been heard out and allow the arguments to go forward to court. I wondered what your view was as an editor.
Yes, I mean, well, I think that is, you know, that was a possibility, but I think it was a really, really difficult case there that was sort of, that was on very much of a knife edge.
Right. Polly, would you like to take on that diversity point, and then I can pull up some other questions?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo what Alison said. It's absolutely critical to connecting with audience to look like them, act like them, speak like them, feel like them. I think two additional things. One is that I don't know a newsroom in the country that's not really focused on this now and really actively trying to make a change. It's, you know, really understood to be a key part of this all. And at PA Media, in our training division, we have an absolute boom in apprentices that we're partnering with newsrooms across the country to bring school leavers into newsrooms and train up, because we need to kind of get past that barrier that university presents and really kind of seek out the talent locally. And it's really interesting to see the flood of calls we've had in the last year from media partners looking for ways to shift the dial, because this is really hard to do. And then I'd just link it back to something I said earlier about the wider issue of trust. You know, this is the same in all those other establishments. People don't see people like them in those positions, and so I think it's part of that trend of mistrust across different parts of society as well.
We've got a number of questions, of which I'm going to do in the same territory. I'm going to take the shortest. It kind of says the breakfast campaign. Whoops, that would be nice. The Brexit campaign and trust in the media. Tony John Ash, please do discuss. I think, Jamie, I'm going to come back to you. I mean, I think refighting perhaps the Brexit wars and reporting, we might feel that's slightly familiar, but I am going to segue it, and I hope Tony won't mind, a bit to the sort of sense that what that did show was perhaps that BBC impartiality. I've got a lot of people got questions in my timeline saying it was a bit of a failure, you know, and BBC and others didn't give enough information on the kind of Remain side, and we know that there are Brexiteers who feel just as strongly the other way, and that's fed an appetite, which now seems to be coming to life, for alternative news-led providers. I'm thinking of things like GB News. I think News UK has got a streaming channel in the works. One, do you think that that is really what has happened, that Brexit kind of broke the BBC monopoly to a certain extent? And two, how do you feel about these cheeky new entrants to what once been the sort of BBC, but BBC, Sky News, ITN kind of space?
Well, let me start with the second bit first, while I try and think about my answer to the first bit. The second bit, you know, the BBC should never be about trying to reinforce a monopolistic position. It should and does welcome new entrants into a pluralistic news market. And in as much as, you know, in recent years, you know, the growth of LBC, the launch of Times Radio, the new News UK streaming offer, the launch of GB News, my sense is there's plenty of swimming pool for everyone to play in. and we welcome innovations that see investment in the news industry. And certainly, you know, in previous years, it looked less likely that anyone would seek to make that commercial investment. So let's have these services launch and judge them on their quality. But as a point of principle, I would like to, you know, welcome.
It sounds like you disagree with a lot of your defenders. If I would just, I think it would be a fair, come within the remit of fair comment.
Well,
if I were to say, if you look at something like The Guardian or Guardian Media, you know, there's a view that they put quite consistently, have fleshed out, that says the BBC is under attack, and this is a sign of the kind of attack the BBC is under.
I don't think that's right. I don't think investment in professional news organisations should threaten the BBC or be seen as an attack on the BBC. And, you know, I noted that GB News, you know, has acquired a Freeview channel and will be Ofcom regulated, and therefore has the same duties around impartiality and accuracy as the BBC does or other broadcast media do. And I genuinely look forward to seeing how they will manage that. I think the News UK one is particularly interesting because it's a streamer service and therefore is not going to be kind of content regulated in the same way. And I think that certainly poses interesting questions about what the content will be like, and you know, and how they will take their, you know, duty to uphold accuracy and impartiality in the streaming space. But I don't assert any ill will on their part. I just think it's an interesting part of the broadcasting realm which is currently unregulated. Interestingly, I must answer your Brexit point. I feel, I mean, I was the editor of Today during the referendum for my sins, and I think reflecting on
always with the easy gigs.
Reflecting on it, there were certainly things in the campaign that I just thought any professional journalist would think you could have done better. I mean, the one that I personally really felt strongly about was our coverage of Ireland, of if you like, the Irish question. I seem to remember there being one day in the referendum campaign where Ireland really rose to the top of the agenda, and it was a speech John Major gave about about the security situation in Northern Ireland. And if you look at the extent to which the Ireland issue, for better or for worse, on both sides totally dominated the next 3 years of negotiations, it is unarguable that everyone, including the BBC, failed to cover this enough during the referendum campaign. So don't feel for a moment that I haven't reflected on deficiencies in coverage. But I don't think that impartiality was one of those deficiencies. I think the BBC was right to try and take head on this enormously knotty question about what impartiality in a 50-50 national referendum meant, and try and break out some practical ways of dealing with that. And it was an immense challenge, and people are going to keep criticising us for it for as long as people feel strongly about the outcome of that referendum. But I believe that we did the right things in good faith as working journalists, as you would expect us to do.
Who'd like to come in? You can come in either on Brexit, as long as it feels remotely relevant to now as opposed to refighting 2016, or we could perhaps pick up that idea of, do we welcome new and sort of different styles of news providers warmly or otherwise? Who'd like to come in on that?
I'm happy to take that. I really don't want to talk about Brexit though. Like just because we don't have to, so can we not?
I think you probably speak for, well, I should say half of the audience, or 48-52, and the other half are still like, I want to talk about it. So come in on what you'd like to talk about.
I think more verified, proper journalism based on reporting, based on people getting out and about, and on a TV channel regulated by Ofcom is a really good thing. Jamie, I think, look at the BBC's drama coverage since Netflix came on board. It's been absolutely superb. And I think new entrants to a very established media realm, I think, could really challenge us to all do better, and that would be a good thing.
Alison, any plans for major mirror group entry into television?
I'm not so much television, but I think generally competition has always got to be a good thing. But I think we've perhaps bypassed one of the crucial issues of this whole debate, which is who is financing all this journalism? Because trust is, as we said right at the very beginning, is dependent on quality journalism, which time has been spent on it, it's been checked again, and that there's that effort put into it. Now, that is a very expensive business, and we all know that. Anyone who's worked in journalism for a long time knows that good quality journalism costs money. And that brings us back to the whole nub of this issue. Who is going to be paying for this quality journalism? And obviously there's different revenue models being followed in different parts of the industry. But we all know as well the threats that are being made to us by Facebook and Google. We go back to it again. And until we really address that, that is going to be a real challenge for us all.
And do you have a, well, yes, I mean, do pick that up actually, because also had an early question, to be very unfair, the very first question you didn't get a question in. Can trust in the media be improved by treating the big tech companies as publishers rather than content providers? Brian Peelan, who's editor of View magazine. Can I just stay with you for a moment on that, Alison, because that, you know, that's, so you've suggested slightly something should be done.
Well, I'm not necessarily sure that treating them as publishers is actually the answer, but I think it's somewhere in between, isn't it? Because clearly how they've been operating up until this point is not good enough. And clearly their determination to avoid playing by the rules at all costs has got to be addressed. I mean, we've all seen what's been going on in Australia, and that now there's been some kind of backtracking, and they seem to have got away with it this time, but it cannot continue like this. And I think there's a growing clamour for them to step up and pay some responsibilities. And it's coming at them from all directions. I mean, I think all the stories that we've seen recently around the racist trolling of footballers and other members of society, this is no longer acceptable. And we cannot have the social media companies dominating our democracies to this degree. And I think by tackling that more effectively, and no one's saying it's going to be easy, it's going to be very, very difficult, but only by doing that and getting the money back into the journalism that we require, are we going to put that shot in the arm of journalism that we require to rebuild trust to the level that we need.
Kim Sengupta, Australia's fascinating story, wasn't it? It was a real kind of sort of whirlwind there. And I saw Nick Clegg, who now seems to have a sort of historic role in going around sort of dousing the flames of a story that sort of got going, always with a sort of look of kind of infinite regret about what Facebook might have been up to. Do you think that is this a decisive moment when Facebook in this case, but the big tech platforms have got the message? Or are we still really lagging behind having a workable solution to go forward where the balance would be healthier?
Well, I thought, first of all, and I thought Nick Clegg's rant today was quite extraordinary, really, and amusing. I think it is a step. If you look at what the Australian government said, you know, they're liaising with other countries. I think Scott Morrison spoke to Trudeau. They've spoken to the Indian government. And I think it's a trend which will continue. And as we know, what happened in Australia was a bit of backtracking, and a compromise was reached. But obviously, it is not entirely satisfactory. And I don't think that the tech companies, Facebook, Google, can block it now. I think it's a process we just started, and will go a long way. Just one other point which emerged from this was, if it's true, the role of Mark Zuckerberg in allowing people like QAnon, etc., from using Facebook to disseminate their messages, which he allegedly intervened to allow. So, there are various aspects of what they do which needs to be looked at. And as Alison said, it's certainly entirely unfair the way they've been operating so far.
We're in about the last round or two, so I'm going to try and sweep up anything that I think would be really reprehensible not to have asked. I think this one actually might fit well with what Polly is now leading. It's Jackie Bennion. What does anyone suggest as a business model that could restore local news coverage that Facebook and Google have largely destroyed? Well, whether that's the only reason, but you could question, because there was already problems around that. The MEPA has had a great local news gathering network. Others, of course, please jump in as well. But it really does feel like a model that's been creaking and under strain for a lot of years. Polly, have you got anything up your sleeve?
Well, no, funnily enough, I don't have the plan for local news just to present that no one else have thought of. It's, you know, a desperately difficult situation. And I sat on the Cairn Cross advisory group looking at that regulation problem, and actually when we came down to the true and immediate problem of sustainability of news, it is at a local level where there is most desperate urgency. Two things I would say: I think we need to shift the debate between transparency and scrutiny. Journalists scrutinise. I think it's a trick of history that they provided that scrutiny of council meetings and local courts. Actually, we need government to set up transparency systems so the information is getting out of those realms, because there isn't a business model to support it. So I think actually the solution was you know, a kind of happy coincidence for so long. We need to get the information out from these private, semi-private places, because journalists aren't going, and open it up and give it the air. And then I know that there are things that, you know, everyone is trying locally to build local subscription models, membership models. And I think Alison's point around really being close to your audience and being in there with at a local level is probably the answer, just from what I've seen, but I just don't know what that looks like in reality now.
And Alison, just perhaps a brief thought on this, and then some other quick questions. I mean, I wondered also, you're there in a paper that serves a lot of underserved parts of the country. We have seen a lot of local newspaper offices close. I mean, probably across both of our careers, that would be something, if you went to a town or city, there is less of. I mean, obviously you can't simply magic up funds, you know, from your profit margins to sort of keep everything always as people would like to have it in terms of physical presence. But is there more that the big national groups could do here?
Well, I mean, the Mirror is owned by Reach, which obviously is the biggest local news after the BBC in the country. So and yes, we have seen the closure of newspapers, but some of the news websites are really thriving at the moment. And we've just, over the last year, we've started lots of new ones. We've got Leeds Live, we've got like across the whole country, we're setting up new live sites, because there is a demand. There is still a demand for local news, and there is still a demand, perhaps even more so since coronavirus, for that sense of community. We've seen the huge success of some of those hyperlocal sites as well. So there is definitely a demand there from readers, but it's just going to be in a very different form. It's going to be digital, and it's going to be sort of much more kind of some of it user generated, not all of it, but I think it's a different model to we've seen before, that I think people will have a kind of a sense of community with. So there's definitely hope, I think. I think there's a lot of hope actually in the local and regional journalism market.
And can I just make a very quick plug for the BBC Local Democracy Reporters Scheme, which, as most of you know, is, you know, £8 million worth of licence fee funding rightly being used to support exactly this function, and to partner with Reach and others and provide that material as pool for local news organisations around the country. And something to think about the future is, how do we make that into a kind of flywheel for further success and investment in local news for all.
That's your one and only plug tonight. I'm going to go from the local to actually, I'm going to stay with you, Jamie. This will be I think probably your last question, and then just closing thoughts from everyone else. But I think this is right on your worry list at the moment, so we were remiss not to ask it. BBC World News was recently banned in China. Patricia Nielsen says, of the FT, was blocked by censors before that and accused of producing fake news in the context of CGTN being stripped of its license to broadcast in the UK. But someone viewing Chinese state media might not know this. How much is this kind of narrative a threat to the BBC? How do you fight it? And also, I wondered when I saw that story, as terrible as it is, and watching that encroachment of further encroachment in China on media freedoms, are you not worried about being caught up in sort of tit for tat bans, and that this in the end, you know, sort of constrains your ability to provide the kind of excellent international coverage that you do?
And we are worried about that. And the question goes right to the heart of the kind of false narrative about equivalence, which is being spun by the Chinese government, which is somehow the BBC is responsible for Ofcom's decisions on CGTN, which of course has no connection with it all. And therefore the BBC will be under the facade of being punished for supposed editorial breaches around our coverage of Xinjiang detention camps and the WHO trip to Wuhan, be further restricted in China, closing down our last reach in mainland China for BBC World News. In truth, the even more worrying development, which some people might have missed, was the fact that RTHK, which is a public broadcaster in Hong Kong, had removed the last bits of World Service English radio programming from its radio networks. Its head was dismissed and replaced by a lifetime career civil servant from the Chinese government who'd worked, amongst other things, in the state security branch. And this is a very, very worrying development. In truth, we can only argue our case as we're doing and say that we have no agenda on China beyond reporting to the BBC's normal standards from inside China, as far as we're still able to. And we very much want to protect the integrity of our reporting teams in the mainland, in Beijing and Shanghai, and of course our significant teams in Hong Kong. So it is a worrying period, but I think everyone should just take a deep breath, and Chinese government understand what we tell them privately as well as in public, which is the way that the world perceives China is influenced as much by the BBC as any other international broadcaster, and it benefits China to have that trusted reporting coming from inside the mainland.
Just before I'm going to get closing thoughts from the rest of the panelists before I hand back to Doug Wills, and there's a question somewhere here, but I think it's a good place to end, really. You can interpret it as it befits your own branch of the media. What have you learned about the trust debate, and what have you done to enhance trust, either in your own work, your own reporting and editing, or in the institution that you lead? Kim, fond journalists love sitting around having a chat about what's gone wrong. It's got our favourite thing. Have we learned anything ourselves? And do you do anything differently after a long and varied career that you think, yeah, actually, I probably need to also address this issue myself? I went with Kim on that one just because he was sitting there looking like a man who could take that question on.
Well, regrets, of course, I have quite a few. But can I just very quickly give another plug for local news only in the sense on local news and misinformation. It may not be very widely known, but when you had the spate of attacks on 5G masts, this country more than any other, Europe, by the way, find the local newspapers were the ones who were very much pointing out the fallacy of it and exposing it. Yes, I think we looking back on it, we obviously hadn't done enough as mainstream media to connect with our readers, and I think that's one of the reasons we are in the situation as we are now. But I think certainly most of the newspapers are more nimble now in how we interact with our readers, all kinds of platforms set up, and I just think we will need to keep on adapting if we are to continue to survive and prosper.
So it's going to be very quick thoughts, because I just don't know what time we will get kicked out of this rough bar. But Alison, yes, what have you learned? And of course, you've been a journalist and a senior executive, also through things like the hacking scandal, which implicated the Mirror, among others. These are painful lessons. You must have realised along the way that perhaps we forfeited trust and didn't realise that we had in some ways done so. So what would be your takeaway on that?
for a long time, many areas of the established media had an easy run of it. I mean, newspapers did; they were selling gazillions of copies, and the BBC did, and there was very little competition. But I think now is the time where we have to address it, and I think there's external things that sort of much bigger than the media that have to be looked at. And you know, a divided society is a society that doesn't have trust in the media, so we have to look at how we make our society less divided. We have to look, as I said, about the social media platforms, and we have to make sure that our established news brands have got the money coming in from their journalism to do quality journalism, which drives trust. So that's the big picture stuff. And then we have to look to ourselves. We have to ensure that our newsrooms are sufficiently diverse, that they're representing our readers, so that our readers trust us. We have to show our workings out. You know, it's that lifting the veil. It's showing how we get to the point, and that's what gives us credibility. We have to sort of almost give a sense of positivity as well, that not everything is absolutely disastrous, and that we are kind of in this with our readers. We're in life. We're part of it. We're not sitting on the sidelines pontificating. And I think it's all that sort of stuff which adds up to this sense that we are part of society, and that we can be trusted to try and make things better.
Polly, last word to you.
Everything Alison said, plus I think on a really personal level, as a reporter, I think you build trust in every single engagement you have in your professional career, every single person you interview, everyone you meet, every person you call back to follow up with and show them what you did with their story that they told you. I think you build kind of grassroots trust there as well. It's probably not enough in this digital age, but it's what we as journalists can do, and that's, you know, my personal experience.
Thank you very much indeed. I was just amused, someone pointed out to me today about something I'd written, that I'd been writing columns for 25 years, so I've never sat on the sidelines pontificating. That's what attracted me to the job in the first place. But I think, look, that was such a lively and interesting and candid debate. Thank you very much, certainly, to all of our questioners. I get to retire from the fray now and hand you back to the trusted Doug Wills. Who may or may not be muted. Are you there, Doug?
Yeah, that's me, unmuted. Thank you, Anne.
You're muted again, Doug.
Shall we have another run at it?
Am I here now?
You are definitely here now, live and dangerous. Have another go.
Right, well, thank you, Anne, for chairing that in the very challenging role that you had today. In fact, I know one of your other hats is to speak on the moral maze, and I think that the two came together in some points tonight. But one good thing possibly that's come out of COVID is a refocusing on the traditional media, and that came through tonight as well. So that was one good area. As we said at the beginning, we have experts here. It's a complicated situation. There is no one answer, but I think we've heard of a few paths that might lead to building trust, and let's hope that we actually have the continued media organisations who find a business model that works and gets the support. Just one thing on looking ahead, Clive Murray had a mention earlier, and you can see him and hear him on a lecture he's giving, and that's the lessons that he believes can be learned between the US and the British media. And he will be lecturing in tribute to Harold Evans, who died last year. And that's a lecture sponsored by the Press Club and the Society of Editors. And a final thank you to the stationers and newspaper makers. The company is basically, it's the media company for Livery, media livery company in the City of London. And it represents all aspects of the media. And it has been going, and I have some notes on this, for 600 years. But still, it says here, and I think it's a fair quote, it has had the good sense to embrace printing and every new technological advance in the communications and content industries. And going right back from the years of Caxton to today's digital media and online publishing. So if anybody's interested in any of the above, go to the websites. So there's the Stationers website, London Press Club, and the Society of Editors. Thank you all for staying the distance, and thank you again for each and every one of the panel members tonight. So good night, and sadly we can't go to the bar for a drink, but another evening. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Doug.
Bye-bye.
Cheers, everyone. Good night.
Bye-bye.